Hey, it's Tamara Marie. Quick question before we get started with this week's episode. How long have you been learning Spanish, but are still afraid to speak the language? If you want to improve your Spanish conversation skills, I wanted to let you know that from September 3rd through 14th, 2024, Spanish con Salsa is hosting free Spanish conversation practice sessions. That's right. You will get the opportunity to have someone to talk to in Spanish in a friendly environment, and you can do that if you just join us in one of our free sessions. So our team will be having sessions for the next few weeks, and it doesn't really matter if you're a beginner or intermediate. If you just don't have anyone to talk to in Spanish or you really want to improve your Spanish conversation skills, this is an opportunity for you to do that. Make sure you sign up as soon as possible to see if there are some spaces still available. Just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/conversations2024. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/conversations2024. I look forward to seeing you in a session this week. Now let's get started with the episode.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast,
the show for Spanish learners
that love music,
travel, and culture.
Close your grammar textbooks,
shut down the language apps, and open your ears
to how Spanish is spoken in the real world.
Let us show you
how to go from beginner
to bilingual.
Here is your host,
certified language coach,
Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 209. Welcome to episode 209 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, I'm going to share a sneak peek of a group coaching session that I did. And if you missed it, not to worry, I will let you know very shortly how you can attend your very own live session, because we will be having that coming up very, very soon. But I wanted to fill you in on this session because we covered some very, very important information, and we talked about the 5 things that keep you from Spanish fluency. So there are some ideas that we have about language learning, about fluency, about what it really takes to get fluent in Spanish. And a lot of these misconceptions are really roadblocks that stand in our way of becoming fluent in Spanish. And I guarantee you, if you are a beginner or even a more intermediate level with Spanish, or if you've had experience learning other languages, you may have noticed that some of these things have popped into your head. So I want to talk a little bit about that in this episode. Again, I'm going to be sharing an excerpt from a workshop that I did, exclusive workshop, where we actually did a group coaching session. And that is where, we really walked through a process to get fluent in the next 90 days. Now, if you are interested in joining our workshop, 5 Simple Steps to Spanish Fluency, which if you're listening to this as this episode drops, then you will be able to attend the session this Saturday. And we will be going into detail on 5 simple steps to reach Spanish fluency. And we're going to walk through a process that you can really improve your Spanish conversation skills in the next 90 days so that you feel more confident and more fluent speaking the language. So to register for that workshop, just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/free workshop. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/free workshop, and you'll be able to register, and you'll get the sneak peek on exactly what is the process to go from a beginner to bilingual, like we talk about in every episode of the podcast. So I hope that you're able to register, SpanishConSalsa.com/free workshop. But in this episode of the podcast, I'm going to share with you those 5 things that are keeping you from Spanish fluency. And if you register for our workshop this weekend, we're going to go into some more in-depth solutions on how you can really get past these 5 issues that most language learners will face at some point in their language learning journey. So with that, I will let you listen to this excerpt from the workshop. And again, make sure you register for the workshop for this Saturday if you want to go more in depth on some of these topics and be able to take it to the next level. So here we go with the 5 myths that are keeping you from Spanish fluency. I'm going to to talk about some of the common myths, right? Because usually there's one of these voices in our heads that we're hearing. And spoiler alert, they're all lies. But it's usually one of these things that is keeping us from reaching fluency. The first voice is la vieja. It's this old lady who believes that you should have started learning Spanish when you were a baby. You are absolutely never going to learn at this point, right? If you didn't start from a baby, you'll never reach fluency. So that's one belief that a lot of people have. The second myth is that voice of the high school Spanish teacher. So for those of you who had to pick a foreign language in school, like I did in when I was growing up, it was okay, pick Spanish or French, right? So we also in the beginning may not have had an option. And then once we did, maybe the teacher who taught us wasn't the best teacher. Maybe we just didn't do well. So we might have this nagging voice in the back of our head from childhood that says, you're just no good at languages. And then there's la profesora. And this one is the one that is in the head of most perfectionists I know. As a recovering perfectionist, I can say that with confidence. This is that voice that believes that you must reach level C2, according to the Common European Framework of Languages, before you dare utter a word of Spanish. Because if you make a mistake, one little grammar or pronunciation mistake, then everyone's going to laugh at you, especially a native speaker. They're going to go home and they're going to tell all their friends that this gringo does not know how to speak Spanish, and it's going to be the joke of the entire week, right? That's what we erroneously believe. We really think that people are paying that much attention to us. But this is that voice of that nagging profesora, that perfectionist that thinks you've got to get everything right before you even start speaking. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Native Spanish speakers do not speak with perfect grammar. I have gotten text messages. I remember this when I first started learning, and I was texting with people like I would meet in language exchanges. And I would go, wait, I learned that word. They're spelling that wrong. How am I picking up their errors in their native speakers? And my Spanish was not that great at the time. And it's because there are certain things that are pretty common, like the letter B and V in English, right? In Spanish, they have pretty much the same sound. And a lot of people mix those up, right? So, they're native speakers. So I would dare you to tell them that they're not fluent. So Spanish has a lot of variation in the way it's spoken. People have varying degrees of education levels as well. There's so many factors. So if you're looking for this perfect Spanish, it does not exist. And even if it did, native speakers don't have it. And by the way, secret number 2, you probably do not have perfect English grammar and spelling either. But I dare you to say that you're not fluent in English. Okay. So let's try to keep these aside. And first, I want us to recognize them, but I want us to also recognize that they're not true. Then we have the time cop. Love this guy. He's the one that just believes you don't have enough time to be fluent, right? You can spend, all the time you want and trying to figure it out, but you're never going to get to fluency because you need to spend your full attention, your full time in your life studying the language. You need to reach 10,000 hours of practice. How many of you have heard this 10,000 hour myth? In order to get fluent in Spanish, you need 10,000 hours of practice because that's the number of hours you need to do to master any skill. And unless you have the time to commit full time every day, it's not going to happen for you. Right? That's a voice that's in our heads. We also have the nomad. I have to quit my job and go live abroad in Mexico, España, Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica. If I don't move to a Spanish-speaking country, I'm never going to be fluent. That's the nomad's voice. Ready to sort of, move. And it's nice to travel. I love traveling. The experience is enriching. But I want to challenge this myth that immersion only takes place when you're living abroad. Kayla is one of our earlier members of Spanish con Salsa, and she actually has Cuban heritage. And when she joined, she had been around family members who spoke the language, but she just never, became fluent. She really struggled with her confidence. She didn't feel like she could talk to her own family members in Cuba. But it wasn't until she put the effort into learning Spanish on her own while she was at home and she did not live in Cuba. It wasn't until then that she even felt comfortable traveling on her own. because normally she would have someone with her that spoke Spanish, and that was kind of her crutch. Once she got the confidence to speak the language, then she was able to travel solo. And then she surprised me with this one. She decided recently, she just moved this past year, actually, during COVID, she moved to the Dominican Republic. And she said she would not have felt confident to do that had she not started speaking first. Now, obviously, we usually don't think about this, but obviously travel in and of itself is stressful, right? You got to figure out where you're going. You got to spend money on things. You got to find out food. You got to hope you don't get food poisoning because you're in a different country, like all these things. And you think that that's the ideal learning environment when you're stressed out? Or even worse, you move somewhere abroad, you relocate, you don't know the language. You've got to, figure out where you're going to live. You've got to do all these things in a language that you're not familiar with. You're not going to be super comfortable. So I actually would argue that this nomad has it backwards, that in actuality, you need to do your own sort of immersion first. We'll talk about some ways to do that before you just decide to move abroad. And in fact, there's people, and raise your hand in the chat, let me know. If you live in a country where English is the dominant language, which I'm assuming most of you do because you're in the United States, how many of you know of people or communities where you live where there are people who do not speak English, right? And this is not to get into the debate about should people learn English. It's not what I'm trying to say. But recognize, yes, there are communities where people live, they're able to get by in their own languages, and they never really have to learn English to get by. The same thing happens to people when they move abroad. There's a huge community of expats in Costa Rica, for example, who are from Europe and the United States, Canada, and they have a huge community there. And there's some who've been living there for years and do not speak Spanish. So there's a myth that, you're going to get fluent if you're just around the Spanish language. That's not actually how it works. So which one of these characters is keeping you from fluency? Is it the Spanish teacher who believes that you're just no good at languages because you weren't doing it well when you were a child? La vieja that believes that you had to have started from when you were in the womb or you're never going to speak with fluency. La profesora who thinks you've got to get it perfect before you start talking at all. That time cop who just keeps telling you, you don't have the time to do this. There'll never be enough time in your life for you to get fluent in Spanish. You're too late and you need to quit your job and make language learning a full-time thing. Or the nomad who really does believe that they're not going to reach fluency until they actually just live in Spain for a year. So which one of these things is in your head? Which one of these voices is bugging you? So Selena's saying La Profesora and the nomad, Chloe the nomad, Gary the time cop and La Profesora, Yemi La Profesora the nomad, time cop and the nomad. Okay, yeah, so we have like a mix of these different things, right? Kind of going on in our heads. And the only thing that I want to really bring to your attention about these is, one, to acknowledge that if you see other people type in the chat, we all have these voices, right? These myths that are brewing in our head that we believe. But the most important thing is that none of these are true. And if you believe one of these, I invite you to put these voices aside. Let's put them like in those cartoons where you have like the devil and the angel on your shoulder. Let's pretend these are all like El Diablo, the devil is, put them aside just for the rest of the session. You can go back to believing it later if you want, but just try to suspend the belief that these things are true as we talk, and we will hopefully get you to see that that's the case as we get through this session. If I accomplish just that, I'll be happy. If you just shed one of these, they're really limiting beliefs, right? When it comes to reaching fluency. The truth, though, la verdad, is that there are only 3 real reasons that people fail to reach fluency. And again, very simple as the definition of fluency. 1 is they're lost. This means they don't have a clear goal and they don't have a plan. And how you know if you're lost is very simple. Are you able to clearly state your Spanish goal to me right now? What is your current goal? Or can you just tell me a list of random things you've been doing in Spanish, right? So if I was to ask you, look, all right, what's your goal right now? You say, I downloaded Duolingo and I've been doing that. And I got up to like a certain lesson. That's been doing good. Oh, and I listened to the podcast too. The podcast is really good. And, I'm planning to go to Mexico. I really want to go to Mexico. I want to be able to talk to people while I'm there. And that would be fun. But yeah, I don't know. I signed up for a couple courses. I kind of was doing it for a while. Like if that sounds like you, That's Celine said, why you call me out like that? I'm calling all of us out because that's what we do, right? That's kind of like human nature. When you don't have a plan, that's what it is. But we're going to correct it today, so don't worry about it, Selena. But that's how you know if you're lost. If that's the reason. Reason number 2 is you're distracted. I call it shiny red ball syndrome. Or if you see like the squirrel, like dogs always being distracted by like things running by. And this is a lack of focus. When you're chronically distracted, it is almost impossible to make progress because you're always going from thing to thing. You don't do anything long enough so that it works. And if you listen to the podcast a few weeks ago, we talked about language learning types. This is like the dabbler, right? The person who's always kind of in different things. And how you can know if you have this shiny red ball syndrome is this. If you're not on your phone already, pull out your phone and let me know how many apps and courses you've downloaded related to Spanish that maybe you've never opened, or there's courses that you've bought and never finished. How many apps do you have on your phone? How many of them do you actually use? How many of them have you actually gotten through a full course or session or level or whatever they have on the app? And how many have you just not made progress with? Well, Gary says 10. Yemi says 4. 3 and use 2. Wow, Ryan, only 1. That's good. Yeah. So, it's a thing, right? We can download anything on these devices and we think, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. But we don't follow through. Miriam says 5. Rochelle and Chloe's 3. Latanya 3. Haven't finished any of them. Yeah. So this is how you know if you're distracted, right? If you only have 1, for those of you who only have 1 or 0, like Cynthia, then this probably is not what's keeping you from fluency. Reason number 3 is the loner, right? If you just kind of feel like, look, I'm going to do this on my own. The problem is that you lack a support system, right? And if any of you watch the Olympics, put your hands up in the chat if you watch any part of the Olympics that happened recently, or at least like the medal ceremony. We saw everyone get up on the podium and you had like the gold, the silver, the bronze, right? That person that won the gold in the middle, when they interviewed them after, what did they say? Did they say, oh, I did this all by myself? Or did they say, I want to thank my coach. I want to thank my teammates. I want to help all the people that helped me get here, my hometown, people that rooted me on. I don't know if you guys saw when Simone Biles went home in the parade they had for her. There's a whole community behind this gymnast she performs. When she performs, she goes out there on her own. But she had a team with her, even if she's doing solo events, that helped cheer her on. They cheered her on when she was struggling. It was really a beautiful thing to watch. So think about this. If an Olympic athlete who's performing at their highest level has all of this support, hola Karen, ¿cómo estás? Has all of the support behind them, why would you think that you could just do something on your own and be effective and successful? And of course, there's things you can do on your own. I'm not suggesting that. It just takes a little bit longer that way. And if that's kind of where you're at, that might be the reason why you haven't got to fluency yet. And the problem with each one of these, with being lost, being distracted, trying to do it all by yourself, is that they're all enemies to being consistent. And consistency is really the key to reaching fluency. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. And, I think a lot of times we might feel like we're alone in this process when we're learning Spanish and we want to become fluent. All the time, we don't really have friends that are on board with us, or maybe our family isn't supportive, or maybe we just don't even want to share it with anyone because we don't think they'd be interested. But that's really why it's important to have a process in place and a community to support you so that you can get to your goal of speaking Spanish fluently. Like if you're listening to this podcast, I know that's something that you aspire towards, whether you're just starting out in your language learning journey, whether you've learned other languages before and you're just adding Spanish to your list, or if you are more advanced and you've been learning for a while, but you just don't feel confident in your ability to speak Spanish. And when someone asks you, are you fluent in Spanish? You kind of, look down and go, no, I wouldn't say that. I'm just learning, or I'm just studying. And they go, how long have you been studying? You're like, oh, about 10 years. Like, you're not fluent yet? So I want you to be able to confidently answer that question. Yes, I am fluent in Spanish. And if you want more details on the entire process that we do here at Spanish con Salsa with our team, we have an amazing team of certified language coaches that are also native Spanish speakers that will help you go through this process from just being a beginner, or even if you're at a lower intermediate or intermediate level, to someone who feels more confident in your ability to actually use the Spanish that you know in a conversation with a real person. Not ChatGPT, not a bot, not an app, but with a real live human being, because that is the goal. If we want to be fluent in Spanish, we want to talk to real people. So again, if you want to join us for our workshop this Saturday, SpanishConSalsa.com/free workshop. Again, you can register to hold your spot at SpanishConSalsa.com/free workshop. As always, I hope something you heard in this episode has helped you go one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.